Raquel examined Manny's face, wondered which of his features she'd most obviously inherited, though mostly she noticed he'd lost a lot of weight since she'd last seen him. Was he ill? "I'm your father, and I love you very much, Raquel," he said, apparently misinterpreting her look. "You're a very funny man," she said. "The father part, that's a biological fact, and a father always loves his daughters most. Except you have no sons," she said. "You always were a stickler," he said. "I've got something for you two," and he stepped into the apartment. He returned in a minute with a bottle of wine. Adhered to it was a handwritten piece of masking tape in place of a label. It said, "Number 71. It's not a sanctioned designation yet," he said, "but we've been calling it Vin de l'avenir lointain, wine from the future. Think of it as a hybrid brought back by a time traveler. That's the sort of sophistication we're talking about here." He filled their glasses. Raquel noticed that tiny bubbles clung to the inside of the glass. The wine hadn't finished fermenting. "To Annalyn Barbuto," he said, holding his glass aloft. He used his own last name, which Raquel's mother had replaced with a new one almost 20 years ago. How egomaniacal, she thought. How blind. The wine tasted like a $10 Shiraz, psychotically fruit-forward, as jammy as a jam jar, as subtle as a meteorite. "Some of these new hybrids are not merely about scent and flavors," he said. "A few aim for what you could call a classier high, a supple buzz that would work well during formal affairs or business dinners, a flesh-infirming euphoria without too much disinhibition or slurring." "Fantastic," Raquel said. "So, in what novel way can we expect this to fuck us up?" Manny thought this over while examining his cuticles. Then he took a sip of the wine and scrunched up his face, as if recognizing all the mistakes he'd made in life. "I'd like you two to figure that out, the particular emotion, the psychological bent elicited by this wine." Annalyn might have done okay had she stayed with Manny, Raquel thought, despite his ego. At least he was interesting. Strange indeed, but interesting. Of her mother's other men, she couldn't quite say the same. She poured herself another glass of wine, drank it down quickly, then poured another. Before long, her eyes were moist, and she hiccuped. A gust of wind whistled through the railings of all the balconies, causing a low-pitched, harmonizing sound to rise into the air. It was quite beautiful in its way. She felt a kindness toward her mother, a timeless kinship that had been hidden beneath all the bullshit, all the chaos of life, beneath the disappointments and the petty letdowns. "Sadness," she suddenly said, lifting the empty bottle. "That's what this wine does to you. It makes you sad. Sad as hell." "Agreed," Jerry blurted, a tear rolling down his cheek. "That's close," Manny said. "We're aiming for something a little more nuanced, folks." "Honestly, I'm not sure I care what nuance this stuff elicits." She put her arm around Jerry's neck, kissing him on the cheek. "My best buddy and lover wrapped into one. My Jerry Chelada." He grasped her arm and pulled it tautly around himself. "Way back when," he said, "my sister called me best buddy. Did you know that? I miss those days. Man, do I miss them. She's in Lake Placid now, 3 kids. Those old days never come back, do they? They are irretrievable." He seemed to drift. "The wine is designed to elicit the semi-paralytic state of nostalgia," Manny said. "Not many commercial uses, to be honest." But Raquel barely heard what her father said, because she was remembering a quiet afternoon in their little house in Tarrytown, her head in her mother's lap, her mother's hand caressing her hair. It was a scent in this memory, too, a bracing clothes detergent smell that spoke of uncomplicated promise, of utility and open-heartedness. Was Manny in this vision of the past? He was still squarely in their lives then. Yes, that must be his goal. He was trying to actively elicit himself in her memory, give himself some standing in the present by conjuring himself in her past. Did he think her a fool? He must be somewhere in the memory, though, lurking just out of sight, a dark form leaning against the door jamb or looking out the window from a shadowed corner, a man who, like all the rest, would soon be left behind. "There's something of him in you," Jerry said, looking at the bedroom door, on the other side of which, passed out on the convertible sofa in the living room, Manny was faintly snoring. "Please, no," Raquel said. "A love of the obscure. He gets carried away with these crazy ideas. And the eyes, you've got his gray eyes like they're made of stone." She rose up on one elbow and looked at him blankly. "Of gray and precious stone," he said. "I don't think my mother would have liked you, actually," she said. "Is that good?" "I think so, yeah." She began to sniffle, her eyes getting moist. "Ugh," she said. "Here we go again. Cry away, baby, he said, and he pulled her into his bare shoulder. After about a minute, she said, fuck me, Jer. He waited a few beats. Are you sure? Definitely, she said. He kissed her, and she could hear him softly slide out of the threadbare sweatpants he wore to bed. How do you want it? Oh, he was so conscientious, so proactive. Slow and steady, she said. He kissed her again, then put her on her back. And deep, she said. Go as deep as you can. It was just what she needed to slow her thoughts, to make her woozy and warm and somewhat in love. But when they were done, she pushed him off, wanting to avoid the cooling layer of coital sweat that formed between them. She could feel a little fit coming on, the desire to roll him off the bed. She wanted to hear the thud of him hitting the floor. What's up, he said, his voice so soft, half asleep. But he knew what was up, she knew. The next morning, she woke to find a handwritten note on Jerry's pillow. When you find a man who loves you and he asks you for a dance, don't be such an asshole. Take a chance. Take a chance. The familiar scent of his shaving cream was wafting out of the bathroom. It was time for them to get ready. The memorial was held in White Plains at a bar called Pleasantries that her mother and her best friend, Gina, had frequented for years. Gina had booked it in its entirety for that Sunday afternoon. There, set upon a white tablecloth in one long row, were framed photos of her mother, from the young, starlet-looking waif of the 1960s to the smiling, somewhat overweight beauty she had become in her later years. There were no photos of her last months, of the wasted woman, the wan, questioning smile, when Raquel had thought her the most vulnerable and, in a stomach-churning way, magnificent. Of all her mother's ex-husbands, the fathers of Raquel's halves, only Manny and the Baltimore police lieutenant were in attendance, and were in fact now talking to each other in a far corner under a bolt of sunlight, laughing in agreement at what seemed to be shared recollections of her mother's foibles. But she wished to speak not a word, not formally anyway. Yes, she did her duty and mingled with most of the Warners, showed herself to be sad but steady, and then she settled down with Jerry at the bar. The barman, congenial, Van Dyked, and in his early 50s, was dressed in black chinos and a white shirt, a bartender's funereal wear, as best she could tell. She ordered a pint of porter, letting its sweet thickness roll down her throat and warm her, then ordered another. Soon she found herself starting up a conversation with Jerry, a what's next sort of conversation, about their lives together, about whether marriage was necessary to a couple's long-term happiness. And she began to think that she could do this after all, that what she loved most about her life was its persistence, its tenuous embrace. And it dawned on her that the man now holding her hand was staring into her eyes as if he knew something about her she was yet to discover. Thanks.